Hi, everybody. Well, I think, let's get started. I think we've had a great program so far, and I think we've got two exciting panel discussions coming up. When the committee was first planning for this Shabbaton, was when I first heard about the ReKindle program.
Mike, your mouth. Michael.
I was saying, when the committee was planning for this Shabbaton is when I first heard about the ReKindle program. ReKindle program, according to its website, attempts to reignite the historic alliance of Black and Jewish Americans forged during the Civil Rights Movement and advance the shared fight for justice, equality, and respect for people of all backgrounds, races, and religions. And when I saw that, I said, that's exactly the kind of discussion and conversation that we want to have today. And then I learned that we actually had congregants who have participated in the ReKindle Fellowship and have completed some of their cohorts. And I tagged John Steiger, and John was with a little arm twisting, no, actually no arm twisting at all. John volunteered to lead this panel. And so I'm going to turn it over to John, and he can introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I know from having been here this weekend that the microphone issue is an issue. So I know I also don't need to tell this group that if you can't hear us, let us know. I know you will do that. And I'll ask the panel to get much closer to the microphone than you feel comfortable. But that's what's gonna work. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This has been a really exciting Shabbaton. I hope you've been learning a lot throughout the course of the weekend so far. And I'm happy to be part of this. I'm very happy to do anything with ReKindle. I had a great experience. We are all ReKindle alum from various points in time. Just to tell you how this panel is going to go, I'm going to say just a little bit more about ReKindle, just a little bit. Michael really covered the main part of it. Present a handful of questions to the panel, and then open it up to questions from anyone here. So what I'll add about what ReKindle is, and I'm reading from their mission statement, to drive meaningful social change by fostering collaboration between Black and Jewish American leaders through open dialogue and face-to-face conversation. And there's some other things, but that's the heart of it. And when you become a part of ReKindle, you become a part of a cohort, a group of usually around 16 people, split between 8 Blacks, 8 Jews, and in our cohort and on our panel, some Black Jews. So you purposely, very carefully chosen to get diversity of experiences, diversity of opinions all together in one cohort. Again, evenly split between Black and Jewish fellows. We meet for 5 sessions, but also have a lot of outside activities, programming that we do. And we did, in this past year, a Juneteenth celebration and a Sukkot dinner. And I think the most important part of it is the relationships that you build. There's these programs, these get-togethers, but it's really the relationships, the connections that you make that I think are the most important thing. So we had very open, sometimes difficult conversations in ReKindle, especially if you think about over this past year. There was one cohort that was sort of in the middle of what they were doing when October 7th happened, and the cohort since then. So some really good but tough conversations. And the way that ReKindle does that is, first of all, selecting amazing people. But then second of all, we have these guidelines. And so I'm going to read some of them here to provide a guideline for us too, when we open this up to questions from you all. So you can know what it is, that we think about when we get together and have these conversations. So what we share should be honored and respected. No one on this panel speaks for one another or for an entire group of people. We avoid critiquing others' experiences and focus on our own experiences. We listen with curiosity and a willingness to learn and to change, resisting the desire to interrupt. We suspend judgment, and we are open to the kernel of truth in each person's story. We understand that multiple realities really do exist. So that's the ReKindle guidelines, and that's, you know, what we'll operate under today. So let me do a little bit more before we open up the questions. I just finished reading a book by Rabbi Brous from ICAR in Los Angeles. A lot of people are fans of hers. It's called The Amen Effect. And she wasn't writing about explicitly about intergroup relations, but she wrote, only when we're in relationship can we hear things we wouldn't otherwise hear, be exposed to ideas and contexts we wouldn't otherwise consider. As Brian Stevenson, a current civil rights lawyer, says, there is power when we get proximate. Only then can we have mercy and compassion. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment and an accurate sentiment and what ReKindle is about. So before we get into the questions and to try and figure out the relationships here that we all are bringing, and so that the panel can understand also, I'm going to ask a series of questions. I'm going to ask you to raise your hands in response to the questions. I'm going to start this off by acknowledging that Cleveland is an incredibly segregated city. I mean, this is, you know, just a fact by those people who study it. And of course, our country is greatly segregated as well. So we're a segregated city in a segregated country. So I'm not expecting a lot of people to raise their hands for some of these questions. So I will ask you to raise your hand if you have or have had a colleague in your office who is Black. Okay. I will ask you to raise your hand if you socialized with a Black person in the last year or so. Okay. I will ask you to raise your hand if you have attended a Juneteenth, Kwanzaa, or other celebration within the African American community. Okay, hey, you can raise it. In the past year, we'll say. Good, past couple of years. Okay, so I think, you know, as you looked around, there's some interesting things about that and about the kinds of relationships that we have, and that ReKindle is really meant to create. A lot of those questions I couldn't have raised my hand for before I became part of ReKindle. All right, so now, esteemed panel, and in any particular order that you want, I will throw the first question your way. So what was your experience with Jewish people before ReKindle? Gilon, you want to start, or?
Well, when I was 8 days old. Actually, it's a really good question that John asks, because I was born in South Africa and raised in a South African Jewish community, which in many cases at that time in the 70s was very supportive of the Black community. I'll leave it at that. And then I came to the United States, and what John just said about me in the Jewish community, I think I was very much in a bubble, more than I realized until I was part of a ReKindle. I'll leave it at that.
I'll take it. My name is Ross Hassan. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm from the southeast side of Cleveland, Ohio. And just as John mentioned, Cleveland is a very segregated city. And so my relationship with Jewish people prior to ReKindle was pretty much minuscule to none in that time. And so I had always heard about, right, Shaker or Beechwood or Pepper Pike being neighborhoods, but I had never actually had the chance to interact before ReKindle.
And I'm Harriet Watford Lowenthal. So growing up, I was Catholic, raised Catholic, and had actually a lot of friends. I was very fortunate in that I had friends from varying religions and varying backgrounds. I grew up in Southern California. That exposure broadened when I went to college at the University of Southern California. I have learned can't say USC because it means different things in different parts of the country. But I was struggling with my religion and identity through college, was fortunate enough to take some religion classes. And then at the age of 33, I converted to Judaism. and have chosen to continue that practice as my family, and I'll probably talk more about that. And let's just say I've been Jewish longer than anything else without divulging my age.
Hi, India. Me growing up, I actually had Jewish people in my family and really didn't think much of it. Kind of how I was raised, we're all individuals and yeah, my aunt or auntie dated a Jewish individual. His name was Toby. On the holidays, his family would come over and like I knew he was Jewish, but it was just it really, his family. So outside of Toby, I really didn't understand a lot about Jewish culture or religion until ReKindle, or I didn't have any relationships outside of the people who were in my family. But yeah, so
I'll take it. So I actually did have a teacher, Miss Den, right? I thought about her. She would be smacking me upside the head if I didn't mention her, right? But Miss Den was my English teacher in 7th grade and 8th grade. She was very encouraging, a fiery, small woman, but she was very fiery. And she also introduced us to Anne Frank, right? And so that was why I wanted to bring up Miss Den, because she also introduced us into the plight of Jewish people, especially during that time period.
All right, thank you. And what has ReKindle taught you about the Black or Jewish communities? I don't know if that microphone works.
oh, this is maybe ours. Testing 1, 2, okay. I think for me, ReKindle taught me that we have more in common than we have not in common. For me, coming into ReKindle, I think as an African-American person or a Black person, the struggles that African-Americans have been through and when we currently go through it, I feel like we're sometimes feel siloed or we're isolated in the oppression that we've been through. And joining ReKindle helped me realize like, no, the Jewish individuals, they've gone through that too. And maybe it's different, right? We can argue like the differences of the oppression and when it happened, but a struggle is a struggle and oppression is oppression. So, at the end, I admire the camaraderie of the Jewish community so much. I would always tell my fellows, like, I love how you all can not get along, but get along, right? And they're like, they're like, we don't like each other. I'm like, well, when it matters, you do, like, right? Like, you may not like each other, you may have arguments, but you're doing a great job when it comes to the public front, like when it matters, right? And I feel like sometimes an African American, I always used to tell my Jewish fellows that not only do as an African American person, I get it from outside people that look like me or can relate, I get it from inside my community. And I don't feel that type of camaraderie. And we're not a monolith and I'm not speaking for anyone else, but sometimes it can feel like we don't have that strength of camaraderie. So instead of feeling so different in the struggles that I've experienced, I felt united with the Jewish fellows in ReKindle.
And I've had the privilege of living in different places, although once again, I guess the longest in Cleveland, as I look back over my life. And I would agree that the segregation I experience here, being Black and also Jewish, is pretty pronounced. I have to make a decision about which community and what kind of events I'm going to participate in. ReKindle is the first time where I found one of the first, I'll say, times that I found where I felt completely comfortable just to be who I was and recognize the intersectionality, that lovely word that everybody hates these days. But seriously though, between my own identity, between our experiences, between what happened in the 60s, I was young and didn't participate in a lot of that, but I remember a lot of that and learning that. My parents chose to move out of the Jim Crow South in Virginia to Southern California when I was 5. And so listening to those stories and being aware of those experiences was really important to me. And I'm fortunate as well to have facilitated with the ADL for the last, I think it's going on 13 years now, where I do a number of their programs. And that's the other place that I feel at home. Because when we talk about the Holocaust, when we talk about civil rights, when we talk about hate in general, it feels like home. So ReKindle and the friends that I met there in both communities who I did not know really have supported who I am.
So I chose to get involved with ReKindle because again, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, Southeast Side. And it is very segregated in the sense that, of course, your neighbors look like you and you go to churches or places of worship with people that look like you, right? So as an adult, I thought it would be good to develop friendships with people who are outside of my immediate community. So that's why I joined ReKindle. The things that India mentioned, in terms of us being more alike than being different, that was certainly there. But also one of the things that really stuck out to me, to be totally honest and frank here in this space, is that individuals who I had admired or I guess looked up to their working ways, particularly Marcus Garvey or James Baldwin, one could see anti-Semitism in their work, right? I had never viewed it from that lens prior to getting involved with ReKindle. So that was something that opened my eyes, being able to analyze historic figures in a new light and see their work differently thereafter.
So, you know, these questions are like such big questions. So the first person that I met that I didn't know in ReKindle is actually Roz. Roz was sitting and I sat next to each other the first day. And I was excited because I mean, although everybody might mistake us for twins, you know, he's just better looking than me, he's younger than me, you know, he's more articulate than I am. And we became friends almost instantly. And we had the opportunity to ask questions that I think that under normal circumstances are really uncomfortable. And what I learned from my friends from the Black community was that they were angry. And I remember asking a friend, you know, we had one-on-one conversations. I said, why are you angry? And I'll never forget the story. He said to me, you know, two brothers were enslaved, one got out. And one did, and the other one's still there. And I said, so are you mad that we got out? Are you mad because we're successful? Are you mad because we left you behind? Are you mad? And he looked at me and he thought for a long time and he said, it wasn't Roz, it was a different person. He said, yes. And that was hard. That is hard to hear. And then I had to think about, okay, what else have I heard from my friends in the Black community that I haven't thought enough about? And I have another friend who had shared with me, you know, he's like, look, we don't need cheerleaders. We need people to show up and stand next to us. We need people to stand next to us when things are going really bad and stand there on the line, not tell us, hey, I'm sending you a message. And all I could think to myself at that moment was, yeah, that's what we need now. So how are you going to show me that also, right? It was both ways. It was an opportunity in this time, in this last year, that did we show up enough for them when they needed us? Have we? And the question is, how are we gonna build that bridge so that right now when we need them, that the Black community shows up for us as well? And that woke me, like it showed me, like it made me question, have I done enough? Not whether they've done enough for us, but have I done enough to really build bridges and partnerships, even though I think I have? And I realized I had more to do.
So I'll jump in, I guess, moderator's privilege and say that I think one of the important things that came for me out of ReKindle was what Gilon was talking about it being relationship and not transactional, right? We need to be there for each other, not because we need you to do the same thing back to us, but because we need to be there for each other. And as Gilon was saying, you know, not what have you done for me, not what has your community done for me, but am I being in a good relationship? Am I upholding my side of the relationship? So moving into some of these things that we've touched on, and Ross, you had talked about reading Anne Frank. So I'm curious, maybe you can start with that example. Was it taught to you as specifically relating to a Jewish person? Or was it taught to you that this is someone who went through oppression? But then using that as the kickoff to the question that I'll put to the whole panel is, what can you tell us about discussions about anti-Semitism in your communities? Is that discussed? It may not be. So Ross, if you don't mind kicking us off.
So the question was, and Frank, what lens was it taught from?
Yeah,
Okay.
as Gilon said, much more articulate than I am.
So Ms. Den was a great teacher, so I'll give it that. And she did her best to make it culturally relevant and to scaffold, I guess, oppression in Black communities to, right, the experience of Jewish people. And so that was something that was brought up. And even I remember Anne Frank is born in the same year as Martin Luther King, right, 1929. Well, yeah, I believe it was 1929, right? Or yeah, so she kind of brought those two things together in something that I still remember. So I guess the groundwork had been laid prior to my joining ReKindle, and it was able to kind of cultivate it.
And can you also then talk outside of ReKindle, you remember having conversations about anti-Semitism in Black communities or groups that you were a part of?
No, I don't. I really don't, because again, Cleveland is very segregated, right? So we didn't necessarily come in contact with Jewish people in that way, right? To have negative experiences or to where I guess colloquial conversations and jokes could kind of be racy. We didn't have those, right? I guess the closest thing that, and I realized, of course, joining ReKindle, one of my uncles, his name is Lemuel, right? He was affectionately known as Uncle Jew, right? I didn't know that his name was Lemuel until much longer after he had passed, but he was called Uncle Jew because he was good with money and he was good financially, right? And so that's what my family called him, but I didn't realize that that's, offensive, right? And I didn't even know that his name wasn't Jew until I was an adult, right? So, thinking about, like you say, explicitly talking about anti-Semitism, no, we didn't necessarily have those conversations. But again, right, in the background underneath, it is some of those, things that could be considered offensive.
Can I build on this for a second?
Certainly.
Because I love the reactions. It's all right. Everybody can hear me, right? Yeah, I've never been told that I don't have a big mouth except by my dentist. So like, look, I saw everybody was like, we cringe, right? We hear that and we cringe, right? When we hear that. And one of the experiences that I had with a young woman who's in her 20s, who was in our cohort, we were talking about some of the music that talks to things like, I want to have, I don't know the words, so you'll forgive me, I'm right. Like, I want to have Jew money and all that. And she said, you look at it as an insult. And from our culture, it's a compliment. We're trying to reach for where you have gotten to, right? Listen, I'm not telling you to feel one way or another about it. It was just, I sat there and I listened to this young lady saying to me, like, you're just hearing it differently than what we're saying. We're saying we want to be like you. We want to emulate you. You have made such a success of yourself. And that's what this is. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it feel good. It doesn't make it anything. It's just, I'm just sharing that story with you. When you hear when Roz shares this story, like I would have, before ReKindle, I would have been like, what? What did you just say? We need to have a conversation. And now it's like, oh, wait a second. There's a perspective there. It doesn't change how that makes me feel. It doesn't mean that it's a good thing to use that kind of language, but like it's a perspective. So I just want to share that with you because I never thought about it that way before. I'm not telling you it's right or wrong. It's up to everybody to make their own decisions. I share that. Take that and do with it what you want.
Kind of to second that a little bit, like with ReKindle, it allowed you to perceive someone's perception, right? So perception is not always reality because that's personal, but you can perceive someone's perception and understand. And I think I know ReKindle opened up, made that possible to see beyond those words. And it's okay if you see 6 and I see 9. It doesn't mean that we can't still come together and work together. What was I supposed to answer your question?
I think you just brought up something for me, both of you, that it's not always only perspective, it's also intention. Someone may have a perspective, and I couldn't help, my facilitator hat flew on. And, you know, when we talk about stereotypes and anti-Semitism and Jewish tropes and so on, and the whole thing about money and throwing pennies, and there's many, many examples, we go back far enough. Why are Jewish people good with money? It's because it's the only jobs they were allowed to have. Collecting taxes, managing the money, and so on, the jobs that they thought in Roman times were beneath them. So doesn't it make sense then that Jewish people grew up learning about money, learning to manage money, and are good with money? And I think, to your point, the admiration around, you know, accounting and professionals and so on is really enfolded in some of those lyrics as an example. Now, whether it's their intention that way or whether it's an intention to stereotype, I can't answer that question. But it is important to keep, I think, perspective and intention in mind.
Did you have anything to add in terms of conversations about anti-Semitism within Black groups?
Yeah. No, for me, growing up, no. I mean, I didn't grow in a household where we really focused on anything but our own progression, really. There was really no rhetoric about anything other than, you know, come from a very progressive family where my grandfather always held us accountable for who we were as individuals and always promoted our strength in being able to do whatever we want and not letting anything or anyone stop us. There was never not about any other race, not even you would think did they, you know, you're not until I got older, start working in the community, did I start realizing like everything, you know, I was able to kind of come outside of my bubble. But yeah, we didn't talk about white people. We didn't talk about Jewish people. Like I had a Jewish uncle. I just thought it was normal. You know, I knew he wasn't Black, but I mean, he was family. He was at the events. My cousins, you know, were part Jewish. No, honestly, I didn't even know, I'm gonna seem a little ignorant, but I didn't know what anti-Semitism was until like, I think somebody made some comments a few years ago and I'm like, what is that? You know what? And I start looking into it, I'm like, oh, okay, it's another form of like racism or hate. So, and me personally, I'm not that kind of a person. Like I've heard like the lyrics and stuff, but like as far as me and my household and how I grew up, no, like it wasn't a thing at all.
If I may add on to that.
Yeah, please.
I remember that there's a show, Seventh Heaven was a show on a sitcom. And I remember there was an episode where they were talking about the Holocaust. And there was a little boy on the show and he was denying the existence of the Holocaust. And that was the first time that I had been even introduced to somebody that would even deny the existence of the Holocaust. And I thought it was so crazy that he would even deny the existence of the Holocaust, right? So no, there hadn't been talks around, but right, popular media, I was introduced to that concept early, but I didn't believe it or pray to it.
And there is social science research that sort of generalizes this experience that a lot of us in the Jewish community think, well, everybody's thinking and talking about anti-Semitism. And no, you know, people are talking about their own communities, how they can help their families, how they can help their friends, their own communities. So, so that is backed up. All right, so now I'm gonna put a maybe harder question to the panel. And there are some people in the Jewish community who say and have said, we were there for Black people in the civil rights movement. You know, we marched in Selma. We, you know, did a number of other things involved in the NAACP. We were there for Black people. Why aren't Black people there for us now? So anyone willing to jump in? And I guess the question isn't the answer to that, right? I can't ask you to answer that question. But how do you feel when you hear that statement, when you hear that question? And is that something that you've been part of any discussions on?
Well, first of all, that's not entirely true. Although I will say that my experience here in Cleveland has been when there's organized activities, such as last year, October 7th, there was an interfaith community and leaders that stepped up and came and supported the community. There was a bit of that this year with a commemoration, a memorial, where Mayor Bibb was there. So I've been to almost organized events or workshops and such where that is true. Beyond Cleveland, I say it depends. It's interesting, I had an issue with listening to Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of ADL, on MSNBC at one point, because in the same conversation, he said the first phone call he got was from Reverend Al Sharpton, "What can I do for you?" And later in the same conversation, where's the Black community? When the March on Washington had happened, there were many representatives of the Black community that were there and spoke. So it's a very confusing kind of issue for me personally, to say that that's not so. Do I think there's enough of it? Absolutely not. Do I understand why that perception might exist? Oh, yes, I do. Because we don't visually see that. We don't see the support and so forth. I'm on a Monday morning prayer group with my Black sister friends, if you will. And it's an interesting conversation because I'm the one, if you can imagine, that often brings the Jewish perspective, or in their words, the Old Testament perspective, and how all this fits together and why we are one and the same and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, there are very loud represented groups on social media in other communities who it might be true for them or their community, but that gets generalized, that they speak for everyone. And I don't find that so.
So ReKindle, right? I'll use this as an opportunity to kind of shed light and really talk about the impact of ReKindle. Before joining ReKindle, as India kind of mentioned, I really didn't understand even still don't understand the full, but I didn't understand it to the level that I do now, the plight and the oppression and the challenges that Jewish people face, right? And even understanding now after ReKindle that my uncle's nickname is offensive, right? So first and foremost, I would say building those relationships is paramount, and in a program like ReKindle puts myself, right, I can only speak for myself, puts me in a position to be able to speak intelligently to anybody saying anything against Jewish communities, right, that is untrue, false, offensive, right, any of those things, right? So after ReKindle, I feel much more emboldened and have been able to do that. And right, as Harriet just mentioned, even being able to advocate for Jewish interests and say, hey, have we thought about not doing this event on Saturday versus, right, typically doing on Saturday. So that's the main thing. And I also, you know, I'm glad that Harriet also pointed out that there still is some connection, that there still is some advocacy that's taking place organically between our communities. But I'll close it with when John opened it with the questions around how many of us work with Black people, how many of us have celebrated or had them, you know, and been involved socially with them, right? Not as many hands went up. So just how Gilon said earlier, how can we build those relationships and build those bridges? Myself included, I challenge all of us in this room to build more bridges with the other community.
It made me feel like I am, you know, what do you mean? I am. But then realizing I love this when it said, we are not a monolith. I know it's difficult when we're watching television and someone famous or rich says something, but they don't speak for an entire community of people. And being in ReKindle and having fellows here, it's kind of like be the change you want to see, you know? And I can't say that all Black people support this, but I know that I do, and it starts with me. So when you say, where am I? I'm here today. I'm at ReKindle meetings, I'm in the community. And I think, yeah, I just, that, when I saw the question, we were like, whoa, you know, like, but I think, it starts with all of us here. It starts in your neighborhood, it starts on the ground, it starts in your schools, it starts in your workplace. When we talk about ReKindle and, our mission, it's really a social justice mission, really, right? I think as Americans, we do, oh yeah, where am I going with this? But I just think as Americans, no matter what your culture is or your religion, we have the due diligence to respect the liberties of one another and support one another. And I would like for our Jewish fellows and people to know we are here. And I think why it's not seen on TV, honestly, I think there's a power thing going on with African Americans. There's not a Martin Luther King of today. There's not a, you don't have those prolific African American leaders so much, or really organizations for that much that that have so much power to stand up. But there's a lot of power in people and neighborhoods and communities. So I personally, again, I don't speak for anyone else. I do think there is support. I just think it's not quite seen or felt like it should or would like to be.
John, can you repeat the question one more time? Do you mind?
Some folks in the Jewish community say we were there for the Black community during the civil rights movement. Why aren't they for us today? Why aren't they there for us today? And how do you feel hearing that?
So I need permission from my friend Ross that I can share a story about one of the first conversations we had. Is that all
Sure,
right?
that's fine.
All right. So I met Roz, and at some point in one of our conversations, Roz and so I know everybody that knows me will be shocked. I just ask questions, right? And usually, you know, if the filter's not there, it's not broken. It just doesn't exist. And somehow we got into a conversation where Roz turned around to me and he said, look, I asked him about what everybody else, look, I don't know about you, sometimes my stomach, right now, I don't know how many people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable right now in the room. How many people? Anybody feeling a little bit like there's some stuff here I'm thinking about, like, right? I am, I can tell you, I always do when I'm in these conversations. So we got into the conversation about what happened, what was going on in Gaza, what happened with Hamas on October 7th. And the stories between what people hear about what Israel's doing and what the Jews are doing and what is happening and et cetera. And I want to set that aside for a second. And Roz looked at me and what he shared with me, correct me if anything I say is wrong, please.
Okay.
And he said to me, look, I grew up in a neighborhood where I walked into a store, all the people that took care of me were Muslim. They were those are the people that knew me. They were respectful, they were kind, and they had foundational stories that they shared with me about how their families had been treated by either Israel or the Jewish community or whatever. And so I didn't know that many Jews or any Jews, and right, you heard him say that. How did I know any different? And so my answer to your question in that moment is, if we don't know the other foundational story, if I am not willing to sit there and hear the worst thing that somebody could possibly say, which is, for example, for me, one of the worst things is that Israel is committing genocide right, and listen to that, whether I just gets me you can see it gets me revved up. But if I can't sit there and just say, okay, this is their perspective and hear it, how am I ever going to get them to hear mine? And it is a really hard, painful thing to do, to sit there and drop my agenda to know that I believe so strongly that we are good people because I don't want us to be bad people. Right? I don't want us to judge us and look at the Jews and say we've done wrong. Then to have to sit there and listen to somebody else and say, let them tell me how they really feel about what their perception is. And do it in a way that I can go back and then hope that they will listen to my side and we can find a place to meet in the middle. That's a really hard thing. But if I am sharing nothing with you, I hope what I'm sharing with you is we can learn about each other and learn about people. At least that's what I have. I've been able to learn that Roz has a different perspective today, I think, because of that conversation. Please correct me if I've said anything wrong. I'll leave it at that, but I share that story with you because ReKindle was really powerful. And I encourage people to start having these conversations and invite people to your Shabbos table and invite them to your Seder table. Because I think that that's how we build bridges, is one human being at a time.
Well, I did say that there'd be time for questions, but I know we're over, and that was such a beautiful wrapping up of things. I'll look to the, how are we doing? What do you want to do, Michael?
5
Or-
minutes. 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, so yeah, if there is a question or two, I'll remind you of the guidelines, and also one of the ReKindle guidelines is that there's never going to be enough time, and be comfortable with things being left unresolved. So, here.
Wow, thanks a lot. When I'm listening to all of you, I think you're very self-aware of where you're from. So if someone is not fully aware of what place they're coming from to come to this group, do you think they can function or be a part of it? Or do you feel that the process has made you more self-aware of where you're coming from with your original experiences as you approach this other community?
So I hesitated to ReKindle for the longest time because I didn't think I was ready for it. I didn't think I knew enough about the Jewish side of the story. I didn't think I knew enough about how to tell our story and all that. And I don't know if you're ever really fully ready. I think the idea of joining a ReKindle is that you're saying, I'm prepared to go and listen. And that's, I got there, and it certainly had an impact on me in some way or another. So that, I don't know if that answered your question completely, but that's my thought.
I'll add that my background is in economic development. And so joining ReKindle, I was able to build a relationship with Carrie Miller, who's someone who I now consider a friend, who's the executive director of the Hebrew Free Loan Association. And so my initial thinking was that I would be able to, build that relationship, but I got way more than I had initially bargained for in learning about Jewish culture and being invited to Seder and having the opportunity to attend a few Shabbats and meeting cool guys like Gilon and John. And so, to your point, yes, I was open for one reason, but was involved with ReKindle and was exposed to a whole new world.
Really quick, I think the apprehension is more of a reason to join if you're a little apprehensive, because you definitely will learn. If you're wondering, like, why would I do this? I already have a solid community. You should, right? You never know when, okay. I think you should definitely, because if you have a solid community, it does not hurt to support another group of individuals, right? Again, this is America. We're all human beings. It comes back to a lot of the religious beliefs and why you should stand beside someone who's oppressed or working their way out of it. And hey, the more friends, the more connections, the merrier, right? You never know what you're gonna learn when you broaden your horizons and step outside of your community. So if you are a little scared, or you're just like, hey, I don't think I need this, I would challenge people who think like that just to join to see what you can get out of it. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. I think there's a question over here.
Yeah, there's two.
Okay. Oh, did you want
And
to?
Lance.
I was just gonna say, I been living this all my life, learning, teaching, experiencing, but ReKindle opened my eyes to all kinds of things that I haven't considered. So if your heart's there and if you can make the space and the time, highly recommend it. Come as you are, so to speak.
So this will be the last question, but I'll just say that applications are now online. December 15th is you have until December 15th to figure out if you want to join the January cohort. And all the information about what's involved in becoming a ReKindle Fellow is there, rekindlefellowship.org. I think that's right.
Hi, I just wanted to find out what, once your cohort is done, how much interaction do you have with the organization? What kind of follow-up is there? I was part of a Black Jewish Student Alliance in college that was 25 plus years ago, which was an incredible experience. And, you know, I think part of it is because we were in college, so there's all this drop off and you don't have the interaction, but I feel that I'm much more in tune to things than some of my friends who grew up the same way. Because they didn't have the same experience. So what is being done to get more people involved and to kind of really to spread the word and spread the experience and all the things that you've learned to other people, because I feel constantly that we haven't moved very far forward since I was part of this in the mid-90s. And
I'm gonna take a time prerogative because we're already over time. So just to summarize, I think what Joanne is saying, what's the next step for those who have been in the ReKindle Fellowship, and how does that spread to a larger audience? Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in part because I think ReKindle has been operating for like 4 years, so not that long. There've been 8 or 9 cohorts. And I know that is something that they are, that the organization is focused on, is making sure that there's an active alumni association. Like I said, the relationships, I think, are the most important part. And so those are continuing on organically. There have been various programs that have kept people together and have gone across cohorts, so to sort of expand the relationships and keep expanding the circles. And in an informal way, we have an ongoing WhatsApp group where if someone has something going on, we could use support in this, please come to this event. You know, those kinds of communications are ongoing as well. And India and Ross and I are on the board as well. So that's something that is another way that it continues on.
Something 2.0, right?
There was one of those events, one of those follow-up events, and then they're planning some more too. But yeah, let me thank you, Harriet and Ross and India and Guillaume, for opening yourselves to this.
You know what, I know you thanked us, but really, we thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Like really, making the time and listening to what we had to say and to sharing the stories and our experiences. The fact that you showed up, you know, is half of it, and it's really important, and it really is a good opportunity to join. So thank you for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate that.
Thank you to John for organizing